Okay, okay, it's time for the absolute last video, or at least the lecture video for this year, 2022. And it's really just rounding things off and giving a bit of perspective. No math at all in this one, okay? No equations, or at least I don't think so. Let's see. Is unsustainability sustainable? What do I mean by that? Well, assume the following statement is true. We're getting richer and healthier, but we're trashing the planet. Okay. If you don't believe we're getting richer and healthier, have a look at, say, some, what's he called again? Hans Rosling videos. Um, if you don't think we're trashing the planet, well, I don't know. Uh, of course, it's all in a matter of interpretation, but we're certainly trashing the planet in a lot of different ways, right? With climate change and species loss and habitat loss and so on. Okay, so if we just accept that for the time being, and then think about the following two things. One, we rely on services provided by the planet, and by trashing the planet, we're destroying the planet's ability to provide these services in the future. Therefore, if we carry on trashing the planet, the loss of these services will lead to us getting poorer and sicker. Okay? So we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Okay. The second one, we are adaptable, ingenious. Therefore, we can carry on both trashing the planet and getting richer and healthier indefinitely. Okay. Which of these is true? Well, let's assume that you care about the planet and want to help redress the balance between the pursuit of material wealth and caring for the planet. You think we should be putting less into material wealth and more into looking after the planet. What do? Consider the following two strategies. 1. Find evidence for hypothesis 1, or try to convince others of its veracity, its truth. Okay. Hypothesis 1 was we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're all going to die if we carry on like this. Well, that would be the extreme version. We're all going to die soon unless we change course. So that was the first option. The second option, persuade others to care too, either more about the planet or less about material wealth. Okay. Then there are other strategies, which is, say, demonstrate that the system, like global capitalism, say, is going to crash anyway. So we might as well, without the environmental problems, in other words, so we might as well slow it down gently and save the planet at the same time. The first strategy is fine, according to me, then, as long as hypothesis 1 holds. But what if it doesn't? Okay. Then it's super risky, right? You're risking looking like one of these sort of prophets of doom. We've had a lot of them over the years, Like Jevons, 1865, the coal question. He said, I can't remember the exact quote. It was basically like, we face the choice between brief flourishing, or brief, spectacular but brief, like, period, or and then collapse, or a sort of long, steady haul. And he sort of said, look, the way we're using coal at the moment, we're going to have this spectacular period of wealth, and then everything is going to crash within a few years because the coal's going to run out. But he was wrong. Okay. And lots of other people have been wrong over the years predicting similar kinds of things. Like there's the famous bet between, it was Simon and Ehrlich, wasn't it? I think. about resource prices. Was it early? I can't quite remember right off. About resource prices. You could, if you Google the Simon resource price bet, you would find it. So this kind of risky strategy, you want to be sure that you're right, that we really are. Well, on the other hand, of course, if you believe that we are heading for disaster, it's also a super risky strategy. It's just you don't want to sit on your hands either, and that's why people are sort of gluing themselves to the streets and so on. Okay. But I just want to get you thinking about these different strategies. And of course, as you can probably realize, I'm a bit concerned that maybe hypothesis 2 is true. Okay. That we can carry on work going more or less the way we have done for the last 100 years, creating all sorts of disasters, more or less sorting them out afterwards, crashing the planet, but still keeping the economic system going, carrying on behaving the way we've always done. Okay, more or less. That would be sustainable unsustainability, right? We can. So that is my concern. So, and then let's just have a look at some different writers and what they say and think about what the strategies are. Okay. So here's some quotes. The planetary boundaries framework defines a safe operating space for humanity based on the intrinsic biophysical processes that regulate the stability of the Earth system. For the first time in human history, we need to relate to the risk of destabilizing the entire planet. Just because we're not seeing a collapse today doesn't mean we're not subjecting humanity to a process that could lead to catastrophic outcomes over the next century. Okay, I hope that some of you recognize this. This is Rockström et al. Happens to be an article in Science, but this is planetary boundaries. Yeah, and this is their claim, of course, is that they claim one, right, that we're destroying the planet's ability to provide services in the future, we risk getting poorer and sicker, and they even say, look, we're risking total collapse. Okay, and then they're going out to find evidence for this, and especially to convince other people that this is true. Okay, so they've got this framework to do that. Okay, here's another quote. We take it for granted, the world that we love, and we're destroying it so quickly. The light of dawn on the prairie, the silvery flash of fish in a stream, the cry of a hawk over a forest. Everybody has their own idea of the beautiful, and will surely miss it when it's gone. Turns out, this is Rockström as well. Okay, but this is a very different strategy, right? This is much more about how we're just doing the wrong thing, trashing nature. Okay, it's not the instrumental value of nature, it's because it's beautiful. Or maybe a stronger argument would even be, it's not that it's beautiful, it's just that trashing it is wrong. Okay, and I wonder, like a lot of the people, like Rockström, it seems to me that they care about the planet and would like to address the balance. And then they've chosen strategy 1, which is to find evidence for hypothesis 1. Okay. Okay, here's another quote. People are persuaded to spend money we don't have on things we don't need to create impressions that won't last on people we don't care about. Okay. So this is much more like the other strategy, the strategy I prefer personally. It's like, this is crazy. Why are we doing this? Let's just turn around, choose a different path. Yeah. This is a guy called Tim Jackson. In his TED talk, you can find the quote. It's on the web. He's got quite a nice book called Prosperity Without Growth. It's a while since I read it, but I certainly liked it when I read it. I think I would still like it. Okay, so are we all going to die? Is unsustainability sustainable? Well, the bad news is that the regulated market economy has shown a remarkable ability to adapt and react to crises when they arise, including environmental crises. Okay. On the other hand, we do know that environmental crises may often have far-reaching consequences for nature and sometimes for human welfare. When the consequences are only for nature, not a lot tends to get done. Consider the Baltic Sea or bird populations in Europe, or largely for nature. Of course, there are some damages to us from the quality of the Baltic Sea, but it's pretty marginal, right? It's not a dirty Baltic Sea is not going to cause the Scandinavian or Nordic economies to crash, right? Finally, of course, there are examples of civilizations that have collapsed, apparently due to environmental collapse, like Easter Island. What sort of evidence, lessons are there here? Well, basically, what can happen is if the environment starts collapsing, then that should cause feedback effects that we should be able to pick up and change things, right? And this is what we're really good at. When the shit really hits the fan, when things get really bad, even the slowly unadaptable huge economies of the West, they can turn things around and change pretty quickly. But what if we've set in train processes that we then can't stop? This is the whole tipping points. This is why tipping points are so important if you believe in them, or why they're so attractive for people who are trying to make the argument that we need to change. Because you can always say, but we might pass some tipping point and then we won't be able to do anything, so we have to be much more careful now. Well, it's a nice argument, but is it really likely? I don't know. We'll see. Okay. Financial crises. We know that financial crises typically have severe and long-lasting effect, but these crises, they don't signal the death throes of capitalism. So don't think that the 2008 financial crisis, which has then reverberated over the next 10 years at least, don't think this is the sign that it's all over for capitalism. Okay, don't hold your breath. Okay, the capitalist system is a lot more resilient than that. Okay, what about distribution? Well, something we've hardly talked about in the course, but is incredibly important. I talked about this. Oh no, I'm not going to mention names. I want to use this video next year as well. Anyway, we talked about this a bit at the start of the course this year, 2022. Who suffers from environmental crises? The ones who really suffer. They're the people who already have the lowest incomes. Typically, they're the most dependent on their environment. We can adapt in the global north, right? We can adapt. Oh, there's a drought, some forest burnt down. Oi, oi, oi. It's not really affecting us that much. Poor people in many parts of the global south, or people on low incomes with little resources in many parts of the global south, drastically affected by droughts and so on. Who pulls the strings? It's the people in the global north. Okay. So I would argue, if you're looking specifically at issues like climate, it's incredibly much a question of distribution and justice. Okay, and should be more about that and less about we're all gonna die. Okay. Uncertainty and future crises. So according to me, the global economy will very likely be able to keep going as it has up to now for decades or even centuries. growing, triggering problems, even catastrophes, and solving them. And of course, there's still damages left behind. All the while, the space for the non-human or natural world is likely to be circumscribed, cut down, evermore by our thirst for consumption. So maybe unsustainability is unsustainable. Okay, bad news. What about green consumerism? Well, of course, we can all try to do our bit, but it's super tricky. It's an almost impossible task for individual consumers to weigh up the environmental effects of all their different actions. Of course, we all know that we should avoid flying and so on, but beyond that, it's pretty tricky. Or beyond some of the very obvious things, what we really need is consumers to elect politicians who enact laws which lead to external effects being internalized in the price of goods, and in the straightforward cases lead to highly damaging or unnecessary practices being banned, like stop using coal. There's no need to tax coal, right? We just need governments to say no, leave it in the ground. Okay. So basically we're back to just get the prices right. It's just the standard economics prescription, right? But what about values? One of the things we've found in the course is that we've talked about that household choices and household utility functions are also super important, right? And actually, we need to update our moral codes and our social norms to cope with an interconnected world in which each individual has the power to cause tiny amounts of damage to billions of other people. So every time I fly, which isn't very often by the way, but it does happen, at least up to now, like I fly back to see my mum to the UK, I'm adding to climate change in a very tiny addition to climate change, which is my specific emissions or emissions that can be tied specific to my choices are causing like microscopic amounts of damage to billions of people. Okay, how do we get our heads around that? Well, that's a tricky one. But clearly we can't ignore the effects of our actions just because they're very small effects on a very large number of people. And why do we make the choices we make anyway? What gives us utility? In the old days, it was pretty straightforward. You just try to get food on the table for your family, right? But these days, it's largely determined by social norms, and such norms can change rapidly. Okay, what food do we eat? Do we eat beef? Yeah. In some countries, yeah. In others, not at all. It's nothing to do with human nature, right? It's about social norms. Here, each individual can play a role by affecting those around them. How we can affect social norms is not the subject of this course, of course, but what we have done in the course is to show the importance of household choices driven by the utility functions. Technological change is important, but won't solve everything on its own. Pricing externalities is even more important. It will drive technological change, among other things. But if we don't care about nature or about future generations, correct pricing will still lead to bad outcomes for nature and future generations. Oh, that's it for the final video. Okay.